so I kept applying, and finally, I wanted to be there. I was told that I was a veteran and I would never get into PA school by a PA director, which is kind of ironic, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
The whole.
This is Shadow Me Next with Johnnie Gilpen. Johnnie Gilpen, thank you so much for joining us today on Shadow Me Next. I am very excited to talk about some of these things that you have seen and learned in your over 30 years of work in medicine.
Well, thank you for having me here. Glad to be here.
Absolutely incredible. So, Johnnie, take us back 30 years. You're a young kid. You think medicine is for you. Did you know, were you for sure that this was the road you were going to take, or did it kind of take some twists and turns?
I absolutely had no idea, none. I grew up farming in Oklahoma, maybe veterinarian medicine, but never medicine. I joined the Oklahoma National Guard. I was flying on Huey helicopter crew chief, and I got the opportunity to fly as a crew chief on a medevac, and that exposed me to medicine.
Mm.
And that's how I got exposed to medicine. I never had dreamed. It was never in my mindset I was going to be an ag teacher. My family was teachers, and so we went. So I went active duty Navy as a Navy corpsman, and that's how I got my start in medicine.
Which is interesting because if you know anything about the history of being a PA, which is what you are now, PAs came from the Navy. That's kind of where we originated. So it's really enjoyable to hear that our Navy corpsmen are still pursuing that course. Tell us a little bit about schooling. Were you schooled in the military? Were you schooled as a civilian? How did that work?
So I didn't go back to PA school till I was 46.
Nice.
Yeah, I went back as an older, but it wasn't because of due to lack of trying. Um, I got out, I got hurt when I was in the military and medically retired. And so I went back to school and I applied for PA school, and they told me I needed to go back. My grades weren't good enough from my grades prior to the military. And so they told me to get a graduate degree. And so I got a degree in biostatistics and epidemiology.
Mm.
And I applied, and I got turned down three times. It took me four times over 20 years to get applied.
Oh,
Um, they, but I did a bioterrorism and emerging infectious disease fellowship with the NIH. So in the meantime, I was working with Homeland Security, doing um, interesting things. I worked for the State Department's anti-terrorism assistance team, working as an epidemiologist, and and I was still working as a medic. And so I kept applying, and finally, I wanted to be there. I was told that I was a veteran and I would never get into PA school by a PA director, which is kind of ironic, like you said.
mm-hmm.
The whole PA program was tied back to the first three PAs were Navy corpsmen. He told me, I said, well, what about all my experience? He said, I could get people to have your kind of experience. I couldn't get you to pass the test. Kind of, it's kind of ironic. It kind of came back around. I am now on the board of directors for the Oklahoma Academy of PAs, and I got to see that person this year. He turned around, he looked at me, and he just turned around and walked away. He wouldn't even talk to me. So,
Unbelievable.
so that was my process. So I didn't go back to school till later in life. So
Mm.
there was, but I think I took anatomy four times because anatomy is one of those classes that had to be every 4 or 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so I have multiple degrees. I have a degree in EMS. I have a degree in microbiology with minors in chemistry and medical entomology, um, biostatistics and epidemiology, and then PA.
And you know what I think is so interesting is that I'm sure you don't quote unquote, use your microbiology or your medical entomology degree every day, right? But these things, this education that you have really cultivated over the last number of years, It definitely informs the rest of your practice, I would imagine. And perhaps stuff like epidemiology working in the pediatric emergency room right now, that's going to play a bigger role, right? But do you ever, looking back on it, I guess speaking very honestly, do you ever feel like any of it was a waste of time or perhaps a misstep or a misdirection? Or is it all truly collaborative to who you are and what you're doing right now?
Absolutely. Looking back, none of it is. Somebody asked me when I was in PA school, I was the oldest person in the College of Medicine. They said, they did an interview and they said, if you could give us one piece of advice, what would you give somebody? And I said, well, if you're offered a class, I don't care what class it is. I mean, it could be underwater basket weaving. Take a class. 10 years from now, you may not know what that class is. You won't remember it. But if you're in a class, I always say go to lunch with the people in the class, or if it's a couple day class, go to dinner with that people. It's the people, the relationships that you build. Because what I have found is that those relationships are what build, of course, you get education and the pieces that I've learned. Um, of course, we're tick-borne diseases,
Mm.
understanding about, everybody thinks they have, um, some form of tick-borne disease, whether it's Rocky Mountain spotted fever, or, whatever, tularemia. And I'm like, no, you don't have this or that, understanding the epidemiology of certain things, the relationships I cultivated in the military. Now I'm working a program. Hopefully, we'll be doing our Art of Medicine program where we're teaching this class to all the medics at Disney. The guy who I'm working with is somebody I worked with 30 years ago in the Navy. So those relationships, I mean, um, every job, like the job I have now, is somebody I met as a medic 15, 20 years ago.
Mm.
And then he called me during the pandemic, said, hey, right after the pandemic was over, said, hey, what do you make over there at the adult side? And I told him, he said, well, you interested in coming over to the ped side? So
Mm.
all of those relationships, everything, it looks like this scatterboard. If you put everything I did, this huge multiple page resume that I have, and you would think it's like a scatterboard, but it's bumper cars, right? But it all plays together.
I love that. I mean, you're describing networking, which I think we've turned into such a challenging word sometimes, networking, and it feels very pressured sometimes and very stressful for some people. But I love the way you described it, which is relationship building and community driving. And that's important. And I think if you're listening and you feel like you're in kind of like a dead end position, or you're in a place where you really don't see how it's going to affect what you want to do ultimately in the future, I think this is a great story to listen to because, I'm sure you had moments where you're like, well, what am I doing here? Why am I here? This is not going to affect or play a role in anything I want to do. And yet, looking back on it 20, 30 years later, it just all of a sudden it makes sense and you can kind of pull back and see the bigger picture. So hang in there. That's for sure. You mentioned something and I don't want to glaze over it because I do think it's quite interesting. When you were discussing working as an epidemiologist and anti-terrorism, um, I think a lot of us nowadays would know what that means. Anti-terrorism, initially we think about more obvious, dramatic destruction. However, what does epidemiology? What role does that play in terrorism these days?
So I got my role. I wrote, my specialty is foreign animal diseases, as in ag terrorism. Like, go back to October of 2001, you had the anthrax outbreak. Everybody
Mm-hmm.
kind of remembers about that. So when we talk about it in human aspects, we talk about how many people it kills. When we talk about it in agricultural aspects, we talk about the economic impact. So the foot and mouth disease, not hand, foot, and mouth, what we talk about in kids, but foot and mouth disease in cattle and pigs. If it's not in the United States right now, but if it was to get into the United States, we would have we would not be able to export any cloven hoofed animals for at least 1 year. You would have to kill every single animal that was cloven, pig, sheep, within a certain radius, and you go out in a
Wow.
radius. So where this was at, and you're talking about economic impact.
Mm.
So when we talk about these diseases in agriculture, you talk about it in economic impact. And so it's a huge aspect. It's a huge, um, foreign animal diseases have a different multiplier when certain diseases come in, where they have problems. It's considered a terrorist event until proven otherwise
Wow.
because of the economic impact. Matter of fact, they have more resources thrown at them than you would have like some other stuff, because most human stuff we can give and we can collapse it. We don't have that capability with animal diseases, and so they're worried about the economic impact of it. So yeah, it was an interesting.